I'm Brian Hill. I'm just here to tell my story about arriving in Australia on Australia Day in 1968. So this year I'm celebrating my 50th anniversary of being an Australian. Well, we touched down in Darwin at 6 a.m. on January 26, 1968, which was quite a hellish experience in a way, because we disembarked from the plane straight onto the tarmac, so there was no tunnels to nice air-conditioned terminals in those days. So we'd just come from the depths of winter in Liverpool, England. So when we left, it was probably about 3 degrees Fahrenheit and pelting down with rain, freezing and bitter and overcast. Got off the plane in Darwin, dressed for that wintry condition, so we had several layers of clothes on, wool, vests, singlets, shirts, jumpers, coats. So obviously that was just sort of basically hurled behind us as we walked across the tarmac. Quite an eye-opener when we did get to the terminal, because it was crowded at 6 a.m, but we realised pretty quickly it wasn't travellers, it was the locals who were there to get out of the heat as well.
Oh, right.
Apparently it was quite an exceptional heat wave at that time of the year for Darwin, even at that hour of the morning. So so that was our first glimpse of Australia. It was first call. It was just a refuel, because after the haul from Hong Kong to Australia, so we were only there for a cup of tea, a wash, and back onto the plane onto Sydney. So that was a short haul, really, compared to what we've been through for the last 3 days, because it was a 3-day journey by plane from England to Australia in those days. And it wasn't a pleasant one. A fairly unpleasant stop in India, where we had to change planes, which were going from one airport to another through New Delhi, which was just horrendous. The place was putrid. It really smelled a lot. There were people lying in the street. As a 10-year-old, I was convinced there were dead bodies everywhere, but they were just sleeping in the street. Plus there were cattle wandering everywhere, the whole sacred cow. Well, being 10, I was obviously really curious about what I was getting into when we came to Australia, so I'd done some research as a 10-year-old, so research meant looking at Tarzan movies, because Tarzan lived in the jungle and there was a jungle in Australia, and so I was a bit confused about what to expect, and people kept telling me, lots of gold there and kangaroos, so I expected, old story, kangaroos in the street and lumps of gold everywhere, so I was quite surprised to see quite a metropolitan sort of landscape around the airport. So it was a bit of a culture shock, more for the way people were talking and just seeing Aborigines everywhere. And it was quite an eye opener, that first touchdown. When we hit Sydney, it was even more confusing, because we didn't know it was Australia Day. So we came out of the terminal, or through the terminal into the public area, and there were TV crews and news crews everywhere. They were doing stories on immigrants coming to Australia on Australia Day. So it was very confusing while we were being photographed, and cameras pointed. Had no clue at all. So that was an interesting little welcome to the country. Thought, this is a bit extraordinary. Very confusing. So we then left from Sydney to Wollongong by Commonwealth car. So we were driven from Wollongong to North Berkeley in Wollongong to Migrant Hostel, which was an ex-army army camp. So it was all Nissan huts and shared bathrooms and toilets and the rest of it. Right. So a family of 5, we had 2 rooms to live in, and I think pretty cramped conditions, and that was probably deliberate to get people out into the community and to get their own housing and stuff sorted out as soon as they could.
Why were you driven by Commonwealth car?
I don't know. I really don't know. I just know that there was a driver there with a Commonwealth car. It was a nice limo type thing. It was quite pleasant.
Was your family's were you sponsored, or?
Yeah, with £10 bombs. So
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
So I don't know whether it was just we were the only people coming through that day by air to Wollongong, that we got a car instead of getting bundled onto a bus or a train, but that's what happened. So we were in a Commonwealth car. So before we took off from Sydney, we hooked into milkshakes and all that sort of stuff, which was just fantastic in the heat. We regretted that not too long afterwards. As we headed off, the driver was taking us through the national park and down to Sydney through the national park. And when we got to the park, it was closed because it was a bushfire. Now, fortunately or unfortunately for us, the driver was a member of the SES, so the police and the SES members who were controlling traffic gave him a message to carry through to the other crews along the road, because they couldn't keep in contact with them through the radios. So we got to drive through a bushfire on our first day in Australia. Needless to say, that was not something we were expecting, and my mother just lost it. I think she was freaking out completely, started crying, and I don't think she stopped crying for about 30 years. That introduction to Australia was just a step too far for her. But yeah, so we drove through this fire. We stopped every now and then to pass a message on to the different crews that were there about who was coming through and what trucks and everything else were coming through. But because it was a fire, we had the windows wound up, and my sister got car sick. So the milkshake became an issue then, because it was a stinking hot day in the back of a car with consumed milkshake everywhere in the form of vomit. It was not a very pleasant situation to be in for the next 3 hours, because it was a very, very slow and long journey. So